Hello, this is a recording for the intermediate class of New Testament Greek at Regent College, and it is a preview of the phrase diagramming process that you will be working with that is based on the same process done by commentators in the Zondervan exegetical commentary series, which you can see right here. So what I'm going to do in this video is give you a brief run through of the diagramming guidelines for non-narrative text, also the diagramming for that's common to all passages, with just a few notes and brief explanations or additions to the different guidelines. And I will not go through the guidelines for narrative text, but you guys will have a chance to see all of these guidelines in the next video, which will be actual processing through some text according to these guidelines. And what I've done is chosen a text that will hopefully give examples of all of the different aspects of these guidelines that you may see come up when the text just maybe isn't quite as simple. And so to begin with, you'll place your verse numbers at the far left of the text. And I'm not sure how they will have you do it in your intermediate class, but at least for advanced Greek and advanced exegesis, you will probably have a column for the text, and then you will have a column even further to the left where you number that text, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is just the far left of the text box that you're working with. You just keep those verse numbers up there. Then the second rule is just don't change the order of the text. You want to maintain the flow. And this is one of the places that phrase diagramming looks quite different than, say, sentence flow, because you do still maintain a readable text. The one exception would be for things like, postpositive de, chi, any of the conjunctions that are generally the second word, even gar, the second word of a sentence. There will be an exception for that, and we'll see that down here on the section entitled Major Conjunctions. But for the most part, just don't change the order, and that's a good rule to help you really think through the text more clearly. The next is in a series of items or a series of clauses or phrases. As you go through, you will put a number at the beginning of each clause or phrase, and usually you'll actually use a letter rather than a number, despite what it says in the guidelines. And you'll get instructions on that, but generally it's just 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and each line gets its own separate denomination. And then for parallel items, so one of the things you'll see is that as you go through this, the goal of the process is to identify the main clause of each sentence, and then to organize each phrase according to its relationship to the main clause or its preceding or following phrase. That'll make more sense as we start looking at it. But the idea is that if you say have an adjectival phrase or just an adjective and it's modifying a noun, what you do is you place the adjective directly under the noun that it's modifying, because it usually would come after the noun or even a prepositional phrase. And you indent that 3 spaces under the word that it is modifying. However, for things like appositional phrases or epexegetical phrases, and there are a few other examples which we'll see in the text, you will want to notice you'll want to bring the items into parallel rather than indent them. And so I'll show you an example of that in the next video. For Old Testament quotations, you won't have to worry about that in our next video, but they do recommend that you use Arial font for that. You may want to just check with your professor because, Regent uses Times New Roman, and these are the guidelines for the commentary writers, not necessarily written for you. And also, you're going to be working in Greek, and so you want to make sure that that's um, not an issue. For this next video, my computer's actually in the shop, and so I'm on a loaner computer, and I don't have all of the bells and whistles, and so I think my text actually is in Arial, funnily enough. But then we get into specific diagramming guidelines for non-narrative text. And again, we could reiterate the verse numbers, which we already mentioned, and you'll notice that he says 1A, B, C, D, and etc. Each line gets its separate designation. Then here you go. Like I said before, the goal of this is to identify the main clause. And one of the things you'll do is keep the main clause up against the left-hand column right next to the verse number, and you will put them in bold type. And you'll see that even in this, it says main clauses and it's already emboldened. But you'll do that for every main clause. So subject, object, verb, generally speaking. I know you guys are aware of this. But then everything else that's subordinated to it, whether it's an adjectival or adverbial clause, is placed directly above or below the word that it modifies, and then it's indented 3 spaces under the word that it modifies. And you'll notice it says that it's placed directly above. Because you're not changing the word order, if the adjectival or adverbial phrase modifies something that comes after it, then by the nature of the way the text flows, your phrase will precede the verb or the noun, and thus it will be above it in the phrase diagram. It'll make more sense again when we see it live in some text. Now here's one that you will have to make decisions on. I know this is one where we had a lot of discussion in my advanced exegesis course, and I leaned more heavily on the semantic priority, and Dr. Guthrie wanted us to lean more on the grammatical priority, and so that may be just a style issue, but what it means is every if a grammatical main clause functions as a subordinate clause in a series of parallel clauses, the semantic value has priority. Where this will come into play is for your main clauses as you're putting them to the left column of the page. If you say have a new clause that grammatically functions as a main clause, say it's something that's separated by gar. Gar generally introduces a main clause grammatically, but gar is explaining something that precedes it, and generally speaking, and so I would lean more towards the semantic priority, but you may want to discuss that with your professor, what their preference is, and then you'll have to make decisions on yourself. But something that's important to remember is the function of this assignment for your level of Greek, and I think for the value in this assignment, isn't in the finished product, it's in the process. And so if I have any encouragement to you, it's don't rush through just to finish and get something put out there for the professor to look at, but try to help allow this assignment to cause you to process the Greek in a different way and help you understand the text better. I think this is a very helpful sifting exercise to identify the main clause, but also to understand the meaning of the text. And it should produce some really interesting questions for your exegesis work later on. So just a little note of encouragement for you. For adjectival and adverbial elements, a lot of times you're going to have one-word adjectives or adverbs, even participles and things of that nature. You need to choose whether you want to leave them on the same line with the word they modify, or whether you want to subordinate them to that word. It's up to you. You can do this at your own discretion. And I'll show you some examples, like I said before, as we go through this live, I'll show you some examples of places where I would keep it on the line and places where I would subordinate it, and kind of how I'm thinking through it. Not to give you an answer, but to give you a thought process. Um, Now, major conjunctions. Conjunctions introducing or joining main clauses should be highlighted and grayed out. And because most of them are post-positive, you can put them on the same line, keep them on the same line, or you can actually cut them out and use the ellipses to show that you've done that and put them on the previous line. Either way you do it, you just need to make sure that they're grayed out to 50% so you can, it's a way of saying you recognize that this is a conjunction joining a main clause. For the rest of the conjunctions, you don't have to gray them out, but one of the things that, again, I differed with in my understanding of how this process helped me make sense of the text better with Dr. Guthrie was to, sometimes it makes more sense to leave Kai at the end of a sentence or the end of a phrase, but sometimes it makes sense not to leave it there and to show that it is conjoining two different ideas. And I'll show you an example of that. Um, but for the actual rule itself, they want you to generally remain on leave the conjunction on the same line as the element it follows. So we'll see that, and this is again, unless it provides clarity, that's kind of the caveat, and so it will be to your discretion. Now, adding line spaces, you'll do this when you need to show clarity as to what the phrase you're working with is actually modifying. And so sometimes if, say, an adverbial phrase precedes the verb it's modifying, if it's come directly after an adjectival phrase that's modifying a noun that's before it, it'll kind of be difficult in your diagram to see what's happening. And so you add a double space to show, for clarity's sake, what element is being modified by what. Again, got some examples of that for you lined up. For the semantic tags, I actually won't be going through any of this for you. This is something you can just do. It's a bit up to your discretion again, and it depends on where they are up to with their list of semantic tags. It's an incomplete list because they haven't done every book of the New Testament yet in the series, and so I don't want to I don't want to work with it based on a list that you are not working with. But all you are doing is trying to identify the relationships of the text. And a lot of this would be stuff that you're already learning in intermediate Greek. There's a lot of overlap between the functions of Greek that you're learning and the semantic labels that you will be working with in this process, at least in the advanced level. And so I'll let Dr. Guthrie or Carolyn or Jerry speak to that. Depending on who your professor is, I'm actually not sure. Then the last thing, when you notice you will run out of page on the right because you keep shifting things over more and more to the right, you'll run out of page. And when you do that, you just kind of double space a few clicks and then add a line, which I'll show you how to do, and show that you recognize where the subordination is, and you're just having to move over to the left column again because you've run out of space. So that is just an overview with just a few notes for you. Again, my encouragement, let this help you understand the text. Don't let it just be an assignment that you finish, because it really is a wonderful exercise. And now for the next video, we will be going through the text of Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. And I'm going to presuppose that you have at least a basic grasp of what the words are, and what their parsing is. And so, if you haven't worked with that text yet, I would encourage you to go through and just do a rough gloss and parse of that section, that pericope or passage. It's one sentence, chapter 2 of Ephesians, verses 1 through 7. And then don't go ahead to the next video to until you've done that, because I will not parse everything, and I will speak as though you understand the text. So bless you guys, and if you have any questions, you can check with your TA or your professor, and they can um, help you out. If you want to contact me, you can email me and Davidson, or someone can give you that contact. So bless you and have a great time with your Greek.